100 images from the image bank. And from this you'll see that we cover quite a variety of different kinds of projects. And it's, just to go back a little bit, I started practice a little over 30 years ago. It was called Wilkinson Architects then, and Jim Eyre joined me. Okay, so Jim Eyre joined me 3 or 4 years later, and we formed a partnership, and we changed the name in 1999 to WilkinsonEyre Architects. And when we started with just me, we were just doing, bathroom extensions, as you do, that sort of thing, small projects, and it's gradually grown. So now we have, there are 6 other shareholding directors, so there are 8 of us altogether, and about 200 people, mostly based in London, but we have an office in Hong Kong, which we're building up because we did quite a lot of work in China and Far East. So that's the kind of background of WilkinsonEyre, and I thought I would just say a little bit more about the fact that all the projects are very different, and you will see this if you keep looking. And this is because our approach to architecture is based on the specifics of the brief and the site. So we're very we're very context based, and we don't have a formula, a style, if you like. We take each project as an opportunity to do something different, and we try to make it. We try to design appropriate buildings. So you'll see that there are bridges and commercial buildings mixed in with bridges and infrastructure projects. And you'll also see some artworks here, which are my paintings. And the reason I put those in is that I'm very keen on, it's very much a part of my life, drawing and painting, and it affects the way I design buildings. So I like to put them, I like to see them as part of the architecture. There's one. Of course, they're not related, but actually the architecture influences the paintings rather than the other way around. Good evening. So some architects claim to start the design with the painting, but I work the other way, and I start painting with a piece of architecture in my mind, because it's a way of getting it out of my system. And it's the same with drawing. I carry a sketchbook around with me, but I also carry every project I'm working on around in my head. I can't get rid of it. So whenever I stop somewhere, I tend to get the sketchbook out, and I use the time to work through ideas and solve problems. I mean, it's a normal thing for architects, but you're not all architects here, so that's the sort of way one works. And that includes sort of going to concerts, and concerts are particularly good for creativity because it's something about the sort of quietness of the space, and just having the music is so uplifting, and it helps get the mind working. So actually I have a book coming out just on my sketchbook drawings at the Royal Academy in September here in London. And it's quite a pleasing thing, but it's also quite a difficult thing, because it's like opening your hearts to the public. It's kind of rather a private thing, but I kind of doing it because the drawing process is slightly going out of fashion, because the students are working always on computers, and they're not using the sketchbook as a sort of means of communication in the same way. So I do think it's very important to keep it going. Anyway, so that was a bit about the background, and I think we've got through the first slide. And I was going to start talking about the individual projects. When we first got involved with the tower, as Carol said, we hadn't designed any tall buildings before. And we had a couple of Chinese architects in the office who said that we should be working in China. You know, they said there's so much work there, why don't you go out there? And I said, well, I wouldn't go out looking for a job, but if there was a competition that sounded interesting, then we'd do it. And they got us on the short list for the second competition we applied for, which was the Guangzhou International Finance Center. And what was interesting about this was that it was run by the city. So it wasn't a developers competition, it was run by the city of Guangzhou, who master planned this new town, part of the town. It's a sort of, it's called Zulian New Town. And they were opening up, it's a very big, very big, it's a third city, but it's actually one of the richest, I think it probably is the richest city in China. And they wanted to expand it, and they wanted twin towers, strangely. But they, so we won the job for 2 towers, East and West Tower, but they decided to phase it and just build the West Tower first, which was the one that we did. And so we were really pleased that they gave us the opportunity, with no experience, to build something. And we were in a joint venture with Arabs, Hong Kong office. And we had people, they gave us space in Hong Kong, and we worked through the whole process of designing a super tower with Arabs. And that side of it went very well, but the problem was the city was very intense and very demanding. And they actually gave us the go-ahead in August 2005 and said they were going to start on site in December, which we said we thought it was impossible, but so be it. And they did start in December with the empires. So it's something that wouldn't happen in England, probably wouldn't happen in the States to start, just on a sketch scheme, virtually competition sketch scheme, and start digging the piles. But it was a process that we all enjoyed. I mean, it's a long way to go, and of course, in the early days, not many of them spoke any English either, so it was complicated to say the least. But so long as we produced the drawings, they were happy. And that's kind of the way with most projects, actually, as long as you deliver drawings. And but they wanted a lot of information, and they were incredibly demanding. But then there was this process of handing over to the other consultants, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I'm forgetting myself, I'm chatting. Just a little bit about the site here. This is the sort of green lung to the city, a new green lung that goes down to the Pearl River. And this was the site. And it's 4.5 million square feet of accommodation, mixed accommodation. There's a tower in the centre, and there's a new underground route below the site with connections through into a shopping area here. So this is actually a shopping mall, conference centre, and there's a service apartment building above here. And so it's a mixed development with offices on the ground floor of the town, about 1.5 million square feet of offices, and then a Four Seasons hotel above. So it's it was an awful lot to do in a short period of time. And you can see here how the tower is joined by a sort of glazed. Well, it's actually, this is the main shopping area, but this was a sort of a public space which joined up all the activities. And you'll see here there's a helicopter landing pad on the roof. And that was one of these smoke-filled rooms. One of the things in Guangzhou was everybody smoked. Everybody wore polo shirts. They all smoked and had 2 phones in their hands. So it's quite difficult smoking with 2 phones. And they were talking all the time in both phones. So, you know, the meetings were chaotic to say the least. But there was one meeting where the chief fire officer, who was quite an attractive woman in her mid-30s, I would say, in uniform. And she was demanding what she wanted. And one of the things she said, we had to have escape from the top and the bottom of the building, which meant, so we said, well, the only way we can do that is to put a helicopter landing pad on the roof. She said, yes, that's what I want. So he said, well, what sort of helicopter do you have? Because it makes a difference. She said, we don't have any helicopters. But we'll get one. Anyway, she got her own way. And that meant there's no spire. So working through, this was very early drawing in my sketchbook, not beautiful, I'm not going to be published, but it was just a meeting we had with the engineers deciding how we were going to provide the structure. And we went for a diagrid structure, which is very stiff. And the reason for that is, with an expensive hotel at the top, we were informed that people don't like to lie in bed when the building is moving around like this, and because towers do move and it can be disconcerting. So we got a very stiff structure, and I stayed on the 93rd floor when I was last there, and it was absolutely static. There was I couldn't feel any movement. I slept very well, so it worked. And you can see here that there were complications. Which came out of the simplicity. We wanted a building which was elegantly simple, and that's how we achieved it. I mean, it's actually a very big floor plate, but because it's so tall, it seems very slender, and we tried to get this sort of elegant simplicity. So it's a triangular form, curved triangle, and each facade has a radius it's designed to a radius of 5.1 kilometers. Which was done visually and in modelling, rather than deciding we would go for 5.1 kilometres. And it's the fattest down in the lower third, and it gets thinner as it goes up, where the hotel is, so you don't need so much depth. Because you've got 1.5 million square feet of office in this space. And just to look at the section, we have the lift core is enormous. Although it's actually quite an efficient plan, there are 71 lifts in the building, which is something we couldn't imagine. But actually, a lot of buildings have more than that. Because it's a mixed development, you have a lot of, they share the same shafts, a lot of them. So we had 6 high-speed, 9 high-speed double-decker lifts that go right up, and they stop off on these floors, and you change onto, you all know about these things, but we didn't know a lot about this kind of thing, but we spent months on getting this as tight as core that we could. And then, of course, on the upper level, where the hotel is, the 70th floor is the reception area, and we have an open atrium. So this is the building at night, and it's not exactly how we would have done the lighting, but there's a Chinese approach to lighting is quite different. They light bright lights, and they like to light up the whole tower at night. And this is the atrium I was talking about. The top 8 floors are glazed in for smoke reasons, and we made that into a sort of kaleidoscope so that we could collect the light and bring it down into the space. Then it's just open atrium, access to all the rooms at the lower level. And when you get down a little bit lower, There are 3 or 4 levels of restaurants and bars and those sorts of things that go in hotels, and then there are another 2 or 3 floors at the top of restaurants and bars. So it's, it's very well serviced, and it's an exciting place because that atrium, 35 stories, is well, we know that it's the same height as St Paul's Cathedral, including the dome. So there's some room at the front if you'd like to come around. I don't know what the equivalent is in New York, but St Paul's always seems quite a tall building in London. And the 70th floor is open right across its face. So the lobby area opens out, and you've got these incredible views. And then, of course, there are all the other things like the swimming pool with a kind of infinity edge. But you're up on the 68th floor, I think. No, it must be the 73rd floor. Yep. And that was our first tower, this sort of elegant simplicity. And it's been successful. They've let all the office space, and it's multi-let. It's a very typical Chinese way of doing things, where people take quite small sections of the plan, and it was all let very quickly. And then the hotel, they're very happy with the hotel. I saw one of the main board directors who was the same person who said they've got to get rid of the columns in the rooms. They didn't want these big columns in the room. And I said, well, the building will fall down if you take the columns away. He now says people like the columns in their room. So they adopt the columns because they're about 2 meters in diameter, so they're quite significant, having a big column in your room. And this is the Zaha Hadid building in front, the Opera House. Right, so having done one tower, because it's an entree to the club in a way, and that's what we thought anyway. It did get us on the list of various other tower competitions, and but we didn't win, of course, because we were up against all the professional architects, tower architects, except when we got to Crown Sydney. Now, Sydney is the main CBD behind here, and the city is sort of spread out a long way, but all the towers in one main area, and there are limits to how high you can go, which is 250 metres. And there's a line beyond here is the Opera House, and we weren't allowed to build beyond that. So this was a whole new redevelopment area. It was a container port before, a big slab of concrete. And some years ago, Lend-Lease won the competition to develop it, master plan and develop it. And they had Richard Rogers Architects as the master planners. And they're building these 3 buildings. And then Renzo Piano is building these 2 buildings. And we had to compete for this site, which was, in my opinion, the best site in Sydney. And you can see it goes higher than 250 metres. We were encouraged to push the limits, and we've gone up to 275, which is the maximum we can, which is about 70 floors. But it's a resort hotel with upper level apartments, very high quality apartments. And there's a big podium which has casino and lots of, it's a resort hotel, so there are swimming pools everywhere, and there are bars and very expensive restaurants. And it being an international competition, one has to come up with something new. I mean, you can't win this sort of competition with throwing a straight up and down tower. So the brief came out actually on the last day before Christmas, and I grabbed this old watch of information, took it back, which was a nightmare really, because one likes to relax over Christmas. But there I was working through the brief, and it occurred to me that we could actually, that it needed a very sculptural building. And we could use an idea that I've been working on before, which was for a piece of sculpture here. This piece of sculpture was only 100 metres high, and it was going to mark the boundary between England and Scotland. But it didn't go ahead. But, you know, one can recycle ideas. And I had this idea that these are 3 petals that twist as they rise up. And I thought you could do that, but you could fill in the space between the petals. And this is a series of diagrams that show how these are the petals, and that we're filling in the space. And there was a 90-degree twist in it. Well, we actually had to get the accommodation on the building. And it turns out that it works better as a 70-degree twist, and that's what we have on the building. So, starting with those sketches, we then started modelling it in 3D. And even just the first few models, the images coming from the model looked very exciting. Almost, you know, I was really excited. I thought we were onto something here, so we went with it. And this is a model a real model of the final design, because we were in competition with 3 other international architects, and we won it. We had to then produce a model to sell it to everyone else, because no one knew who we were. And it's just placing it in Sydney. So you can see here the CPD, the Opera House, and the bridge. And this is the tall building. There are other buildings. We haven't shown those other buildings here. So it's a sort of high point, a landmark, if you like, in the corner. And the top of the building becomes really important. You can see here the 3 petals, how they finish at the top. And looking at the site, as I explained, this was just a big slab of concrete as a container port. And part of the brief was 50% of the area of the site, the whole site, would be devoted to leisure activities and open space. So the Reese wasn't us, but the landscape architects and the master planners resculptured the edge of this slab of concrete to bring it back to the way it was before with the little creek. And this is our site here, and these lines are the Richard Rogers master plan lines of how the development could take place. They're like fingers of high-rise development. And looking down on our building, you can begin to see how that piece of sculpture, how it is really an inhabited sculpture. The 3 petals here, and a 4th petal is this one, which tails off to become the main hotel accommodation. And this is the whole podium, which has these are the sort of leisure activities at the top. These are all leisure activities with the casinos behind, below rather, sorry. And that's how it fits in. I don't know if you can see, it's not very good quality reproduction, but it is actually a very sculptural form, and it's twisting through 70 degrees. At the lower level, we're on the waterfront here, so these are some of the most expensive restaurants in Sydney, and we must have spent, I can't imagine how many weeks and months talking to the local authorities to convince them that we could have these terraces onto the waterfront. They didn't want anything like that. Well, how can you not use the waterfront? Because our site boundary is this line here, and we had to take over the waterfront to get these cafes and restaurants and bars. So half of the space is open to the general public. The other half is rather expensive restaurants. But the whole thing about this hotel is there's no back to it. It's the main porte cochere, the entrance here. Every part of it has activities facing onto the street or onto the park on the waterfront. And you can go in, there are lots of different entrances, it's very porous. And it was through ideas like this, which we developed in London really, that we managed to convince the authorities that we could go ahead with such a big development. And then as it goes up, the building changes, because you remember it's not just reducing in size, it's twisting as well. This is the main hotel accommodation. There are 20 floors of, a little over 20 floors of rooms, and they're fairly standard, the hotel rooms, because we had a maximum and minimum size to work to. And then that hotel part tails off with what they call the Crystal Club, which is a kind of, you have it's the honours side of the hotel, you know, the people that come back every time. They get special facilities, and they get their own swimming pool at this level on the 24th floor with fantastic views. This is the sort of design for one of the resort areas. And then as you go up, the building is changing, so every floor is different. And that can only work with the columns have to follow the form. So it's quite complicated. I'm not sure there's ever been done quite like this, but we have, there were some risks attached to this, and when I talked to our client and I explained what the risks were, they said, that's no problem, you know, we're gamblers, that's what our job is, we take risks all the time, but I like it, and I'm prepared to take the risk. So they've backed us all the way, and we've got no curved glass here, it's all flat glass. The only thing is going to be cold pressed into position, which we're reliably informed by Palestinians and various other people is possible. And so we're moving forward on that. And the top 3 floors are pretty spectacular. I think they'll be the most expensive piece of real estate in Australia. We're talking sort of at least $100 million. Pretty nice place to live. And this is just an indication of the columns. They're not straight in any means, but this is the pattern they're following. And the core is vertical, so the core is providing the stability. It's got outriggers, but the outer columns take the curve. And then on one side of the building, where we have more curvature, we've triangulated it. And so that means we can do it without any curved glass. On the other side, we have a stepped system where to take up the curvature. So it's floor to floor pane of glass, different lengths, so that we can get our solid panels where the partitions come across. So we can always accommodate the partition wherever it comes. I mean, these are kind of technical issues, but you can imagine that when you've got a building that's curving that way and going round and twisting, it creates a whole load of problems that you can't initially foresee. So we have to solve those problems, and we've got past that stage now. We're on to tendering packages, and that's the view from the city of this kind of sculpture. What I called it in the interview, I called it an inhabited artwork, and they seem to be interested in that. Then there's the question came up, and they said, well, it's a 6-star hotel. You can't just have glass, you've got to have some expensive materials. So for the podium, I said, well, I'll think about it. And I sent this sketch through to the client, which says laser cut white marble. And a note came back saying, yes, we like it. It looks expensive. It certainly will be. It's going to be the only stone tracery and it's really the only Gothic stone tracery in Australia. And it can only be done in a very high-tech way. This is working actually again with Aros, Australia, and using an idea that Peter Rice had for tensioning up stone. So you CNC cut the marble, Carrara marble, with a hole through it, and you tension it up so the whole thing is held together. It's pretty new, fairly scary, but we got this full-size mock-up made, and when I was last in Australia, they erected it for us, and it's pretty fantastic. This is how the CNC cutting of the stone elements. I mean, in the old days, you wonder how on earth they could have made with stone traceries or with hammer and chisel. But this is how we're doing it, and these are the points where the steel tension was going, and it's pretty exciting. I mean, I've not seen a client so excited, actually, apart from the fact that we're a bit worried about the cost of it. But this is what you get. So you're getting a veil, what we call a veil. They're mostly terraces around the building, and there's this marble veil, which is not regular. It's kind of slightly informal. There are repetitions, but it's an informal stone veil. And it gives it a particular sort of character and identity, which is what we want. And then these are I talked about the cafes on the waterfront. We've got a pretty unusual system for the roofs of those. It's using a Voronoi geometry with a glazed top and a variety of different underneath surfaces to provide the different kinds of space that we have. But it's still pretty exciting. So you can see that it is, although it's in the city, it's on the waterfront, so it's got like a holiday feel to it. And that's it at night. And we finish there. I'm just going to have a quick drink before I move on to the next one. So how are we doing? Have I got to speed up?
A little bit.
Yeah, okay. So Toronto, we won this competition for Toronto, and I guess because we didn't know Toronto, it was an advantage for us. Because what we didn't realise was that the CBD in Toronto, and the financial districts over here, and the lakes over here, but there's an 8-track railway and a high-level road that blocks off the CBD from the lake. So there was a very good opportunity to jump over this barrier, because this is Bay Street, and Bay Street is the main financial street in Toronto. So it seemed perfectly natural to us that you could build over the railway and put a block on either side, and you make that connection through to the main CBD. So people who are coming down Bay Street, it's not very difficult for them to either go up over the railway or under the railway. We make connections both ways, and we have cafes and restaurants and things on either side. So it seemed, perfectly reasonable to us, and that's what the client wants to do. So here we have, they said we didn't want any curves or anything complicated. It has to be a very simple building, but we want something special. Now, for an architect, it's like having your hands held behind your back, but it's still possible. So we came up with this idea for. It's a sort of triangulated. It's not it's not quite like the first building I showed. It's not structural, but it's a triangulated cladding system but it's pyramidal. So you get these. This is the sort of sketch of the triangulations, and the model showing how it's fairly simple glazing, but it catches the light in an interesting way. I'm going to go forward. So the whole point of these, when you angle a plane of glass, and if you have different angles, each facet will catch the light in a different way. And when you'll see this from all over the city, so it's not just a one-off thing. Wherever the sun is, it's going to catch the glass, and so it gives it a sort of, it lightens the whole place up, and it will give it a sort of very special look. And it didn't take us much to convince the client of this, just making the model and shining the light on it. So that's part of it, you know. So it's more complicated. Let's face it, you know, you've got a facet which you have to deal with. But what you're getting back is something special, and it's a building which they can let. They're looking for a big bank to take it. So there's this point about where architecture can actually pay for itself by giving something a little bit different. You make it special, and therefore you can get more rental, and you're more likely to let it. So that's the way we were working. And at the top, we've had a lot of schemes for the top, and it's been kind of softened down a bit. We still have this kind of crenellated space at the top, and part of it is plant, and part of it is accessible, sort of high-level meeting rooms and so on. And then, of course, at the lower level, we were trying to provide a good entrance lobby and attracting people. Remember, we've got to get people from underneath the railway or over the top of the railway to this space, and they can come in at the high level or the low level. And the process has been going on. It takes a long time. Everything has to be reviewed in several countries and costed. And it's the whole process, but it's going well. And that's what keeps everyone going. I mean, quite often it's, you know, you've got to cut something, you've got to make it simpler, and then they come back and say, no, we're going with it, we're staying with it, we're going to spend the money. Because they want this sparkling look. And actually the rest of the city is fairly, the best towers are the Mise Vajrayana towers there, and they're black glass and black bronze, but the rest of them are fairly ordinary and fairly simple. So just going on to our last one, which is in my hometown, London. And London is probably the most difficult place in the world to build because we have incredibly difficult planning constraints. And it's mainly because it's a historic city, and you know, some of these buildings in the centre of the city actually go back, you know, hundreds of years, and the planning process has sort of developed over the years. So it's very difficult to build anything, actually. And but when something gets built, like this is the Rogers Stoke Harbour cheese grater, it's called. They had no end of trouble building this. I mean, they had it took years to get the consent, but now they got the consent, they built it. We then had to fit in to this, so we couldn't actually block any views of the cheese grater, believe it or not, even though they fought tooth and nail not to build this. Once it was built, they said, right, you can't build, you mustn't have a building that goes into this space, into the triangle space. So what happens is you work through a series. I mean, I think we had 6 or 8 meetings with the chief planning officer, just talking about what we could do and how far we could push it, what we couldn't do, and, you know, being slapped on the wrist each time. And gradually we got what we think is the maximum we could get out of the site, with a tower which is long and thin here, which sits on, they're stacked, so it sits on another tower. And at the lower levels you get a bigger open space, which can be divided. We've got two entrances, one on Leadenhall Street and one on Bishopsgate. You wouldn't know what Leadenhall Street is, the insurance market for the world. Lloyd's is just here. So you can always let the space to insurance brokers, but they're lazy, they don't like walking very far. So you have to be within 5 minutes walk of Lloyd's. All the insurance companies are within 5 minutes walk of Lloyd's, so they won't go any further along. And so they have to have an entrance here, and then you have to have brokers' lounges for them. They have these spaces where they chat to each other. That's what they say they're working, but it looks to me like they're just sort of resting. And it's quite complicated. But we're also reckoning that when the tower is narrow, the top part of it, actually this will be let to hedge fund managers and people like that. So the rental you can get for a small floor high up in the centre of London is phenomenal. You know, we're talking possibly £200 a square foot, just because they don't want a lot of space, but they're prepared to pay anything for the right space. Obviously, the brokers won't pay that. They have bigger spaces. So, in some ways, having a building which isn't just straight up and down is actually a benefit. Well, that's the way it seems to be working out. Our clients in Mitsubishi, they do a lot of research, and that's the way they're feeling about it. So this is how it works with the one building sort of block, as it were, stacked on another building which is much larger floor plate, and then it gets bigger at the lower level. And this is it can all be let to one place. It's a side core because we have another building along the side, so there's no view on this side, so we've made it a side core, and it steps out. And where it steps, you get very nice terraces overlooking St Paul's Cathedral. And we tried to make each stack different. So the upper level stack is a 3 metre wide cladding system, and it's clear. It's a triple glazed, so it can have clear glass, and it's very crystalline. The next stack is a much closer spacing, 1.5 metre module, which is 5 foot in your terms, and the structure is expressed. And then on the lower bit on the corner, it's a stone cladding to tie in with the historic buildings here. So this is the cheese grater. This is what's known as the Pinnacle, which is being redesigned at the moment. That was the KPF building originally designed, and we have to somehow fit in between these two buildings on the corner. And this is the corner of Leadenhall Street, which really is the gateway into the city. And the kind of views that we end up, I don't know how it works in New York, but we end up doing something like 50 views to show what it's going to be like in every part of town, and how it will from the skyline, and how it affects views from St Paul's and to St Paul's and so on. So it's kind of a process which we're all used to, but anyone else coming into it would think we're all raving mad. And then on the top, the planning officers insist upon having public space, so we put a pavilion on the top, which is expressed as an item, because it has to be raised above the plant rooms. There's 2 floors of plant rooms here, it's raised up. And we can only justify this by providing some extra space for the tenants. So there's kind of conference facilities on the top floor. And that's when I mentioned about this view, we weren't allowed to go into this dining. Is this crazy? It's only from one point in time, and we explained if you walk down the road and take 2 steps to the right, it'll be completely different. No, they specified the point where it had to be within that point. And there's been a lot of concern because this building has upset a lot of people, and so they're very determined that it might happen again. And I think that's the end of my talk. But this is the way that we do it. We put in the planning application. We wouldn't put the application in if we didn't know that we were going to get consent. How long it will take, I don't know. But there's like all these things, it's all based on a program for vacancy of the buildings on the site. So as soon as it becomes vacant, they want to start the demolitions. They want to be able to start lining up the contractors and get on site as soon as possible because they'll try and pre-let it. But that's what building in London is all about. And that's why actually we London architects don't mind travelling because we think it's going to be a nice holiday period. Although Toronto, it wasn't planners that were difficult. Planners were very friendly. It's actually the client's advisory consultancy system that's really constrained what we can do, which is fine because they're representing the client and the client's paying for it. But you know, they have very strict ideas of how things should be. And I guess I could just sort of wrap up by this idea that architecture can add value. But it sometimes might cost a little bit more. But there's a series of choices, so we can always design to a budget, and we do design to a budget. But it's like when you go looking through car brochures, you always want the cars a little bit more than you can afford, and then you try and get them up. If you can't get them, then you get the next model down. And that's the same thing with architecture. But we like to sort of work through the process of trying to, what I call, go for the sort of dream. Start with the dream and then work backwards from there, rather than starting from the base design and working upwards. And I think that's really where I'd like to end. We start with the dream and work from there. Thank you. So we're open.
Perhaps a few questions that anyone want to ask. So, no other work in China?
Yes, we have a 300-meter tower nearly completed in Wuhan, which is a crazy city. I mean, crazy in the sense that suddenly 20 million people it was quite a small place originally. And it's all happened in a few years. It's amazing the amount of building going on. And it'll be exciting, I think, because so much happening at the same time. Yeah, and we're looking at a fairly substantial tower in Shanghai at the moment. But towers are expensive, so there's usually quite a long gestation process, as you know. A lot of work's done, and it has to be checked out. So you need quite a few on the go at any one time.
You said when you build a building in a city, you're looking at the context of the city, you're trying to get it to fit into the context. What do you look for inspiration? Restaurants, the music, the people. What do you look for the, I guess, the vibe, so that it fits in and grabs the concept?
Yes. Well, it depends. And you can see the different sites. I've shown you 4 different buildings on different sites. The first one I showed, there was nothing there because it was a new part of the city. Now, if you look at it, it's all towers because there wasn't much for contact. The only thing one could work on was the skyline for the whole city, and the fact that we had the river nearby, which is kind of a stop to the development. So we were the last of the towns, as it were. In London, there really is a context because we've got the historic buildings and the new buildings, and Lloyd's and all those. It's a very sort of it's full of heritage, so it's complex. In Toronto, they have a CPD that's full of fairly straightforward towers, and they're happy. They're not worried about height. They're just concerned that maybe if one could actually stretch the CPD over the railway lines, that would benefit a lot of people. So they were generally in favour of it, and we were kind of interested. So the process we had to go through was to think of how can you do this? How can you get people to cross the railway or go under the railway with the park? And we started off with the shopping centre above the railway line, but that it wasn't feasible. You could get to the shops there, but they wouldn't let for enough money to make it worthwhile to build. So it's a combination of things that affect the project. And in Sydney, well, the Sydney site is such a special site that no one was going to be allowed to build an ordinary building there. They made it very clear. And so we were picking up on the fact that it's on the waterfront and you have these incredible views to the Sydney Opera House and Bridge, and we tried to work on that basis. But of course, these are all competitions, so I don't know if you know how it works with architectural competition. You get a brief and you're given a few weeks to put together a scheme, and then they have a jury and a team of people who make the decisions, and because you don't know what they are thinking, you can only do what you believe in and try and sell that idea.
Anyone else want to ask a question?
Yes. In the Toronto project, you have 2 towers and then you have this bridge in the middle.
Yes, it's more than a bridge. It's actually a green a park. Actually,
It's a park.
yeah.
You have columns all the way down to the where it's suspended.
Yeah, there are columns between the tracks. Yeah, and it's a contribution that they've made to the city because it's the building, 2 towers, and whenever you build something like that, you have to give something back. Generally, maybe not here, but you generally do, and that's what they wanted. Was public open space. Yeah. And there's a competition for the landscape architecture, so we'll do proper landscape. But also, what we've done is made bridge connections to a lot of other buildings nearby as well. That's part of the scheme. So there's, in Toronto, they don't have bridges much, but they have a lot of underground routes because it gets very cold in the winter. So there's already 2 levels of movement in the city, one underground, which they have a lot of kind of, well, if I call them shops, they're more like kiosks, but there are a lot of them, a lot of places you can get takeaway food and things like that. and they go all around the city connecting places. So then we have to now try and convince them that we can have another level at the upper level. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I actually believe that it's going to happen in London and other cities which are very dense. You can't just expect people to walk at ground level, because in London there's not enough pavement space already. So the more dense it becomes, you've got to think about other layers of movement. And I think the future cities will exist on lots of levels. So you not only get the different uses as you go up level, but you'll have connections at the upper levels. It happens a bit in Hong Kong, where you can walk through at higher level, because that's a very dense city. And I think that the time is beginning to dawn where you're going to have multi-level cities. And I think it's not a bad thing, because you could have really nice activities on the upper levels. You can have nodes, restaurants and parks, all at the upper level.
You did make some upper level tree viewing places in Singapore with
Yes.
that project, so maybe parks will have upper levels as well.
We've got bridges that connect the trees.
Well, speaking of parks, there's still the opportunity to go outside and enjoy the last vestige of sunset of this lovely evening.
Yes.
It also got a little bit cooler if we stand up and have a drink or a water. And thank Chris for very much for coming. This is the first of a series of evenings that we are going to offer called Skyscraper Seminars. And it worked out perfectly that Chris, who I came to know through his project, the IFC in Guangzhou, the project was over in the corner there, maybe some of you worked on it, I'm not sure, but a really beautiful super tall, which we were privileged to feature in an exhibition that we did back in 2011 called Super Tall. So the museum likes to alternate between shows which are about contemporary design and the history of the skyscraper, especially New York City history. So you're here at a time when we've just recently opened this show, which is called 10 Tops. So it's not a top 10 list, but it is all of the world's tallest towers, 100 stories and above, but just what happens to the tops. So it was wonderful to be able to incorporate IFC Guangzhou again, because the top of the tower is this beautiful hotel, and then the beautiful model of the top that you see there that WilkinsonEyre made for our exhibition. We're able to focus on this really jewel-like expression of this sleek aesthetic of minimalist is the wrong word, but of a refined kind of modernism that I think you know to be WilkinsonEyre's work, but then so much more in terms of engineering, and some of you have been working on the engineering, so I don't really need to tell you about the beautiful work that they do. Chris was very kind to bring about 4 of the monographs. This is mine, but there's some in the front there at the bookstore if you'd like to, purchase one, in order to benefit the museum, and have Chris sign it. There are a few copies there. But looking through this is a really extraordinary body of beautiful work. And I think fairly recently that you became skyscraper architects, it's wonderful to be able to have Chris talk about 4 projects on 4 continents. That was the title of the talk that they proposed. The Guangzhou project is the only one that's completed so far, so we're going to see the preview of these 3 extraordinary other projects that are still in the offing that carry on now this specialized skyscraper practice.